Did you know that Canada has an immigration museum?
I did.
Pier 21 in Halifax is one of only 2 national museums that is not located in Ottawa, and it's a must-visit for any Canadian looking to trace their family roots. So joining us now is travel expert Candace Sampson with special guest Cara MacDonald, who manages the Scotiabank Family History Centre at the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21.
Yes.
So this is fascinating.
It is. And I think genealogy is a huge thing right now for people. We're obsessed with it, right? We want to know where we came from.
That's everybody that I know wanted one of those kits for Christmas.
Right. But the thing about genealogy, Cara and I were having a discussion yesterday. And the thing about it is it's a little bit flat unless you have stories to put behind it, right? And you need those stories that make things interesting for you. So the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 collects, shares, and pays tribute to the Canadian immigration story. I love that because we really are a nation built on immigrants, and those stories are so important. So it's wonderful for all of us to remember that we came here through immigrants and where our ancestors came from. So until yesterday, I could only trace my family history back to 1865. Something like that. And I gave Cara this information, and she's a wizard, and she came back to me, and she was able to trace my family history back to 1607 in France.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So I have to thank Cara for lack of sleep. Because,
So what, you were just investigating all night?
Because last night I was down a rabbit hole on the internet pulling up these names. And so I was able to find, Cara doesn't even know this, I was able to find for the Sampson history, the 2 Sampson brothers who came were Gabriel and Jacques. Gabriel is where my family tree is derived from. And he started the Acadian branch of the family on the East Coast. So it's a fascinating story. So Cara gets to find these really unique stories all the time. And what was the one story you were telling me?
Today I had something interesting I was working on because this is an everyday thing. It's constantly all the time. I had a gentleman from the United States who emailed looking for death records for 2 of his ancestors in Ontario region. And as I dug into it, I'm looking, and he's going back and forth across the ocean to England, to Canada, to England, to Canada. And it's all around just before World War I and after World War I. And then his kids come and his kids go to war. And it's all this big, fascinating story of travel and family and marriages. And it ended up through the research that the woman actually passed away in England, and she never even came to Canada. And her husband spent, 10 plus years in Canada. And then after the death of his wife, a few years later, he goes back to England and actually passes away in England too. So this person in Washington always thought that these people had, lived their lives and immigrated to Canada, lived their lives here. But in fact, they didn't. They had both passed in England. So that was pretty exciting.
And those stories get lost, right?
So as I understand it, you're basically looking between the years of 1865 and 1935. So if people want to do a search, what should they come prepared with? What do you need to start something?
Well, that's if we're looking for immigration records to Canada. That's the window is 1865 to 1935 are public. There are other sources for pre-1865 ocean arrivals. We also look for arrivals leaving various countries, Europe and the UK. We look at everything coming into the United States, East and West Coast, border crossings. And those are just some of the things that we'll access for an immigration record. But the scope of the work that we do here is quite large. Mind you, our focus is, relatively on the immigration story, but oftentimes, all the time, I shouldn't even say oftentimes, all the times we're using a variety of genealogical sources to put that puzzle together and get back in time for folks. So we're using birth records, marriage records, death records, census records, land, wills, newspapers,
so there's
everything that you can imagine.
So there's lots of ways people can do this. They can actually go to the Pier 21 Museum and go to the Scotiabank Family Centre. They can actually do it online. We're going to put that link up on the video for people to do that. So you can actually, and this is free of charge.
That was my next question.
Yeah. So that is really good to know. This is free of charge to trace these roots, and it brings these stories to life and allows you to dive in deeper. And it is the story of immigration of Canada, so you can get all these great stories that live there. And over 1 million immigrants came in to Canada through Pier 21.
Yes, my husband's family, they settled in Cape Breton. I always wondered why they settled right in the middle of Cape Breton, absolutely nowhere near the beautiful coast or near Mabu, where we used to like to go. But it's like, why would they pick there? But so maybe those are some of the questions that can be answered. It would be absolutely fascinating.
So I think
to
if you
find
can
out.
visit in person when you go to the East Coast, it's an absolute must visit. And otherwise, you can go online.
And what's the address online?
Well, our main website is www.pier21.ca.
Perfect.
All right, awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us, Kara.
Well, she